Who let this old black man in here to ruin the image of my luxury showroom? Garrett, get security. Look at him. He's standing here in his grandfather's faded gray pants, holding a greasy leather roll like he's about to beg for change under our dinner table chandeliers.
The old man, Solomon Bishop, said nothing. He remained as still as a stone in a river, his knuckles thick as walnuts. Keeping his eyes downcast, Preston stepped down the grand staircase, turning his $3,000 watch toward the spotlight so the billionaires in the room could see it.
Sir, let me be clear. People like you didn't build a place like this. And people like you don't get to touch these multi-million-dollar Cadillacs. Honestly, just go on back to the curb where you belong. Hands like yours are cheap. We don't serve your kind at the front door.
He waved two fingers like shooing a fly, completely blind to the lighter patch of paint on the wall, right above his head, the blank space where a historic portrait had just been ripped down and thrown behind chemical drums. Preston smiled, thinking he had won. He had no idea he was speaking to the man whose father built this entire empire, and whose name was already bolted above the door. 72 hours later, that same young man would be standing in an empty corner office with a cardboard box in his arms and security on either side of him. And the photograph would be back on the wall where it belonged. And every soul in that building would know the old man's name. But to understand how a man can be made invisible inside the very company he built, how the hands that laid the foundation can be turned away at the door, you have to go back. Back before the gala. Back before the rot. Back to a town in Tennessee in 1956, where it all began, with a man named Cornelius Bishop and a garage that nobody wanted to exist. This is a black story. It is about dignity. It is about memory. It is about what gets stolen when no one is watching, and what happens when the man you wrote off as nobody turns out to be the one holding everything up. Stay with me. His name was Solomon Bishop. Most of his life, people called him Soul. He woke at 4:40 every morning out of 40 years of habit, in a small brick house on the east side of Detroit, in a bed that had felt too wide for 2 years now. Della had passed in the spring, 2 springs ago. 51 years married. He still slept on his side of it. He still set out 2 cups every morning and only drank from 1. And he wasn't ashamed of that. And he wasn't going to stop. He'd make his coffee black, sit at the kitchen table in the dark, and look at the wall where the photographs hung. There were 3 that mattered. Della on their wedding day, 1971, laughing so hard her veil had slipped. Their son Isaiah, at 9 years old, holding up a carburetor. He'd cleaned all by himself, grinning like he'd discovered fire. And the oldest one, the one in the cracked frame, brown and faded, almost to nothing, a tall, lean black man in 1956, standing in front of a cinder-block garage in the Tennessee heat, arms crossed, not smiling, with a hand-painted sign behind him that read, Bishop Motor Works. In letters his own hand had brushed. That was Cornelius, Saul's father, the man who started everything. Let me tell you about Cornelius Bishop, because you cannot understand the son until you understand the father. And you cannot understand what happened in that showroom until you understand what was taken down off that wall. Cornelius was born in 1928 in Beaumont, Tennessee, a cotton town with 1 main street, 2 water fountains, and a single rule that ran under everything a black man could work. But a black man could not rise. Cornelius worked. By 12, he could hear a tractor and tell you which valve was bad. By 20, he could take a dead engine apart on a dirt floor by lamplight and have it singing by morning. He had a gift in his hands that God doesn't hand out twice in a town that size. In 1956, he did the unthinkable. He bought a quarter-acre of dirt at the edge of the colored side of Beaumont, and with his own 2 hands and his brother's, he laid cinder block and raised a roof and hung a sign with his own name on it. A black-owned garage. In Tennessee, in 1956, people told him it would be burned down inside a month. People told him no white man would ever let a colored mechanic touch his automobile. People were wrong. Because Cornelius Bishop was the best, and money is money. And a man whose Cadillac is dead on the highway does not care what color the hands are that bring it back to life. The banker brought his Lincoln. The cotton men brought their trucks. And this is the part Sol never forgot. The part his daddy told him only once. In a low voice. The year before he died, the sheriff of Beaumont County, a heavy man named Earl Pruitt, who had once put Cornelius's own cousin in a cell for nothing, brought his 1957 Cadillac to Bishop Motor Works because nobody else in 3 counties could keep it running right. Cornelius rebuilt that Cadillac with his bare hands, made it purr, and when it was done and Sheriff Pruitt came to pick it up, Cornelius, who could not, by the law of that town, drink from the same fountain as that man, who could not sit at the same lunch counter, who had to step off the sidewalk when that man walked by. Cornelius handed him the keys, and the sheriff drove off without so much as a thank you, and then drove straight across the street to the diner, where Cornelius was not allowed to buy so much as a glass of cold water on the hottest day of the year. You build the world for a man, Cornelius told his son. Decades later, and that same man won't let you drink in it. Remember that, Solomon. Remember it in your hands. There's 2 kinds of people in this life. The ones who ask how much you're worth, and the ones who already decided, before you opened your mouth, that the answer is nothing. You will spend your whole life telling them apart. Saul remembered, in 1968, with Beaumont burning behind them in more ways than one, Cornelius packed his tools and his family and rode the long road north, the way 500,000 black families rode it, up out of the Cotton South to Detroit, the Motor City, where they said a black man could work the line and own a house and breathe. He brought the sign with him. He hung it over a 2-bay garage on the east side, and he started again, from nothing, for the second time in his life. And Saul grew up in that garage, learned the trade at his father's elbow, surpassed him. Cornelius said so himself, proudly, the highest thing a craftsman can say. Where Cornelius kept cars alive, Saul could bring the dead back to glory. He found his calling in restoration, taking a rusted-out ruin, a 1930s classic rotting in a barn, and resurrecting it down to the last stitch and screw until it rolled out the door looking like the day it was born. It was art. It was patience. It was love made out of steel. Saul grew Bishop Motor Works into Bishop Classic Motors, from 2 bays to a city block, from his father's hand-painted sign to a name that meant something in every collector's garage in America. When a Rockefeller wanted a Duesenberg brought back from the grave, he called Bishop. When a museum needed a one-of-one Packard restored to concours perfection, they called Bishop, the most respected classic restoration house in the country, built by a black family that started on a dirt floor in a town that wouldn't sell them a sandwich. And Cornelius's photograph, the 1956 picture, the lean young man in front of the Tennessee garage, hung above the grand staircase in the Detroit showroom, 8 feet tall, in a gold frame, so that every billionaire who walked through those doors would have to look up and see the face of the man who started it. That was Saul's rule. The first thing you saw, look up. This is who built it. Saul had a son of his own to give it to. Isaiah. Smart. Kenned. Gifted in the hands, the way the Bishop men always were. Isaiah was meant to take the company into the next century. He was 34 years old, with a baby daughter and a wife, and his whole father's empire waiting for him. When a drunk driver crossed 3 lanes of Interstate 94 on a wet October night and took all of it away in a sound that Sol would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life, that was the night the lights went out in Solomon Bishop. He buried his son next to his father, and something in him, the engine of him, the thing that got him out of bed, went quiet. Della held him together for as long as she could. But the company, the daily fight of it, the meetings and the money and the noise, he couldn't carry it anymore. Not with Isaiah gone. Not with no one to give it to. So when a young, polished, and persuasive man named Preston Hawthorne came along, a Harvard business degree, family money, that a board's worth of charm, and offered to run the day-to-day so Sol could grieve. So let him. Hawthorne talked. The right talk. Honor the legacy. Protect the name. Carry it forward. Sir, like it was my own. Sol kept the deed. Kept the founder's controlling shares, Cornelius's shares. Written into the company's bones. In a way, no one could touch. But he handed Preston Hawthorne the keys. The title of CEO. The face of the thing. And then Solomon Bishop retreated. Out of the boardroom. Out of the showroom. Into a small private workshop behind his house, where he restored exactly 1 car a year. Slow and loving. For nobody but himself and the memory of his daddy's hands. For 3 years, he stayed gone. He let the world believe the founder was a ghost. And in those 3 years, while no one was watching the soul of the place, the rot came in. It came to Sol. The way bad news always comes sideways. From someone who loved him. Walter Greaves had worked the Bishop showroom floor for 31 years. He was white, 73, slow in the knees, and he had loved Cornelius Bishop and loved Sol like a brother. Preston had kept him on as a kind of decoration, a heritage greeter, they called him now, and parked him by the door to smile at the rich. Walter called Sol one evening in the early dark of October, and his voice was thick. Sol, I gotta tell you something, and I don't know how to say it soft, so I'm just gonna say it. Sol set down his coffee. They took your daddy down off the wall, Walter said, crated him up and put him in the storage bay out back, behind the chemical drums. And there's a man here from a branding company. Been measuring the staircase wall for a new sign. They're changing the name. Sol. After the gala. Hawthorne. Classic. Motors. Bishop's coming off the building. Sol didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the cracked photograph on his kitchen wall. The lean man in the Tennessee heat. There's more, Walter said. And now his voice broke. There's a girl works in the shop. Young black girl. Best set of hands I've seen since you. Camille. And they're stealing her work. Sol. Signing her restorations off under some country club boy's name. Underpaying her. And the way they talk to her, the way they talk about anybody, comes through that door that ain't the right color of money, Sol. It ain't your company anymore. It ain't Cornelius. They turned away a man last week. Black fella. Dressed plain. Wanted his grandfather's Buick looked at. Preston had Kessler walk him out the door. Out the door. Sol. Off a list they keep a list. Sol closed his eyes. You build the world for a man. And that same man won't let you drink in it. What gala? Sol said quietly. 70th anniversary. Saturday. Whole city's coming. Press. Collectors. The board. Preston's gonna unveil the new name in front of everybody. Pull the sheet off it like a magic trick. And the centerpiece, Walter laughed. A bitter sound. You're gonna love this. Sol. The centerpiece restoration. the crown of the whole show. It's a 1957 Cadillac. Belonged to some old Tennessee sheriff's estate. Pruitt. The name was. Preston bought it at auction for the story. Doesn't know the story. Doesn't know a damn thing about whose hands first kept that car alive. Saul opened his eyes. Sheriff Earl Pruitt's 1957 Cadillac. The car his father had rebuilt with his bare hands in a town that wouldn't sell him water. Sitting now in the showroom his father's name was about to be stripped from. As the jewel of a party to celebrate erasing him, some men, when they are wronged this deep, get loud. They call lawyers in the morning and burn the house down by noon. Solomon Bishop got quiet. The kind of quiet that has a temperature. Walter, he said, don't tell a soul we spoke. Not one. I'm going to come see for myself. Come on down. I'll walk you in the front. Will? No. Sol almost smiled. Not as me. They don't get to put on a show for the founder and behave themselves for one afternoon. I want to see what they do when they think nobody who matters is in the room. He looked at his father's work pants, folded in the cedar chest at the foot of the too-wide bed. I want to walk in as exactly what my daddy was to that sheriff. A nobody with a pair of hands. And I want to see who in that building knows the difference between a man's worth and his clothes. He hung up the phone. He took out his father's work pants, his father's gray shirt, his father's leather tool roll, soft and dark, with his father's initials burned into the flap by a hand 50 years in the ground. The gala was in 3 days. He had time. On Thursday morning, 2 days before the gala, an old black man walked into the marble showroom of Bishop Classic Motors and asked, politely, if there was any work going for a few days before the big party. He gave the name Sol Carter. He said he'd done a little mechanic work, here and there. Over the years, he kept his eyes down and his voice soft, and his tool roll under his arm. And he stood just inside the service door in his clean, pressed, 40-year-old work clothes. And he watched his father's company decide what he was worth. It took the floor manager about 4 seconds. Garrett Kessler was 31. Jim built, with a haircut that cost $90, and the particular meanness of a man who has just enough power to enjoy it. He came across the marble at a clip, frowning, already annoyed. The way a man frowns at a stain on a carpet. Whoa. Wah. Hey. Hey. He held up a hand, a foot, from Sol's chest, like he was stopping traffic. What is this? Who let you in here? This is a private showroom. My man. This is not, you can't be in here. He looked Sol up and down. The cheap-looking clothes, the work boots, the old leather under his arm, and his lip curled. You looking for a handout. Because I'll tell you right now, I'm looking for a few days of work. Sir, Sol said. Avon. Calm. Heard you all had a big event coming. Figured you could use an extra pair of hands. Clean up. Hauling. Whatever you got. Kessler laughed one short. Ugly bark. Whatever I got. Buddy, look around. Look where you're standing. He swept an arm at the chandeliers. The chrome. The $20 million on the polished floor. You see anybody dressed like you in here? This is the most exclusive restoration house in the country. We restore cars for the kind of people who own the buildings other people work in. And you come walking in the front door and what is that? Are those somebody's granddad's pants asking for whatever I got? He shook his head, delighted with himself. The help comes around back. If we wanted help, which we don't, we're staffed. So, he made a little shooing motion. The exact same two-fingered flick the young man would give again in 72 hours. Sol didn't move. He was looking, just past Kessler's shoulder. Up at the wall above the grand staircase, at the clean rectangle of lighter paint where his father had hung for 40 years, where the gold frame should have been, Kessler followed his eyes. Yeah, we're remodeling. Big changes coming. Now, sir. Sir, I need you to head on out before I call security. Okay, don't make it a thing. And that was when Preston Hawthorne came down the staircase. He came down it the way he did everything. Like he was being filmed. The $3,000 suit. The watch turned toward the light. A phone in one hand. And that smile. Already loading on his face. The smile of a man who finds the world delightfully beneath him. He took in the scene in a glance, Kessler. The old black man. The work clothes, and you could see him decide. In real time. That this was going to be fun. Garrett. What we got. Gentleman's looking for work. Mr. Hawthorne. Kessler smirked. Walked in the front. Says he does a little mechanic work. Does he? Preston came the rest of the way down and stopped a few feet from Saul. And he looked at him. Really looked. Head to toe. With open, lazy contempt. The way you'd look at a piece of furniture you were thinking about throwing out. Sir, this is a fascinating choice of venue for a job search. Truly, what is it you think happens here? You restore automobiles. Saul said quietly. Bring them back. I've got some experience with that. I thought, you've got experience. Preston smiled wider. He glanced at Kessler. Kessler grinned back. They were a team. These two. And the old man was their afternoon's entertainment. Let me explain something to you. Because I can see you're a little confused about where you are. The men who restore cars at Bishop are the finest trained restoration engineers on this continent. They train for years. We are a luxury brand. We have an image. A very, very specific image. To protect, he let his eyes travel down Saul's clothes again. Slow. So it would land. And that image is not, well, it's not this. You understand? It's nothing personal. It's a business. People like you didn't build a place like this. And people like you don't get to walk into it and touch the merchandise. That's just the reality. People like you didn't build a place like this. Saul stood under his own father's empty wall and let those words go all the way in. And he kept his face as still as a stone in a river. He had heard, in a polished Harvard accent, in a Detroit showroom, in the second decade of a new century, the exact same thing his father had heard from a sweating Tennessee sheriff 68 years before. You can't drink here. This world wasn't made for you, even though you're the one who made it. The clothes were better. The smile was wider, but it was the same animal. And Saul knew it, the way you know the voice of an old enemy in the dark. I hear you, Saul said. Quiet. I do. I just need a few days' work. I'll do anything. Haul boxes. Mop floors. Clean up after the party. I'll work invisible. You won't even see me. And there it was. Saul watched the idea land in Preston Hawthorne's eyes. And it was an ugly thing to watch a man enjoy. You know what Preston said slowly. The smile turning cruel. Actually, yeah. Yeah. Let's do that. We've got a 1,000-person gala Saturday, and somebody's got to empty the trash and wipe down the bathrooms and haul the catering crates. And I'd rather not pull my trained people off the cars to do it. He pulled out his money clip thick. Gold. Conspicuous, and peeled off some bills and held them out. Dangling. Between two fingers. The way you'd hold out a treat to a dog. Here. Couple days. You clean. You stay out of sight. You don't talk to clients. You don't touch a single vehicle. And you use the back entrance like Garrett said. We clear. Sol looked at the money dangling between the young man's manicured fingers. His father had handed a sheriff a set of keys and gotten nothing. Not a thank you. Not a glass of water. His father had built the world and been turned away at its door. Sol reached out and took the bills, folded them once, put them in his shirt pocket. Thank you. Sir, he said. I won't be any trouble. Course you won't. Preston was already turning away. Already bored. Victory. Absorbed and forgotten. He paused at the foot of the stairs and threw it back over his shoulder, just to make sure it stung. And listen, old-timer, after Saturday, you don't come back. This is a one-time kindness. I'm a generous man, but I've got a business to run. And frankly, you don't belong in it. He smiled the smile one more time. Welcome to Bishop. I guess. For 2 days. He went up the staircase, under the empty wall, and was gone. Garrett Kessler clapped Saul on the shoulder. Hard. A little too hard. And laughed in his face. Mops in the back. Chief. Try not to break anything you can't afford. Which, looking at you, he laughed again, is everything. He walked off. Solomon Bishop stood alone in the middle of the company his family had built from a dirt floor, holding a mop. He'd just been hired to push. With the name Bishop in gold above the door, and a clean rectangle on the wall where his father used to be, he looked up at that empty rectangle for a long moment. And then, very quietly, so no one could hear, he said the thing. He said every morning of his life, morning, Daddy, and he went to find his father, Inakrate, behind the chemical drums. Here is the thing they never understand. The Prestons of the world. When you make a man invisible, you give him the run of the house. For 2 days, Solomon Bishop moved through his own company like a ghost mop and bucket. Work cart, trash bags, and because he was an old black man in cheap clothes pushing a broom, not one of them saw him. He was furniture. He was part of the floor. They talked in front of him the way you talk in front of a lamp. And Sol, who had spent his whole life telling the two kinds of people apart, watched and listened and remembered everything. The first thing he found was his father. The crate was in the back storage bay, jammed behind 2 50-gallon drums of paint stripper. Lid hammered down with drywall screws. Sol got a driver from his own tool roll and backed those screws out. On a bewan, his hands steady, and lifted the lid. There he was, Cornelius Bishop, 1956, 8 feet tall, in a gold frame, lean and unsmiling in the Tennessee heat, in front of a sign his own hand had painted. They'd wrapped him in moving blankets and stuck him in the dark behind the chemicals, face to the wall, like something they were ashamed of. There was a sticky note on the glass, in someone's careless hand. It read storage, possible donation or disposal. Ask P. Disposal. Saul stood in that cold back room and looked at his father's face for a long time. He did not cry. He had cried himself empty 2 springs ago and 1 bad October before that. And there was no water left in him for these people. But something set in him. Then, the way concrete sets, hard, and final, and load-bearing, he took out his phone and photographed the crate, the sticky note, the drums of stripper, his father's face in the dark. The first piece of evidence. Then he closed the lid gently, and slid the screws back so no one would know it had been opened. And he whispered to it. And he went back to his mop. Over the next 2 days, he found the rest of it. He found the list. It was taped inside the door of the client coordinator's office, where Kessler and the sales staff could see it. and a copy lived in a shared file. Sol watched a young salesman pull up on a tablet. It was a client rating system, color-coded, and at first it looked like ordinary sales sorting until you understood the code. Green clients got the showroom, the champagne, the master restorers, the financing. Red clients got managed expectations, long waits, inflated quotes, the polite runaround, the door, and when Sol stood at his mop, close enough to read over the salesman's shoulder while pretending to wipe a baseboard, he saw what put a client in the red. It wasn't credit. Half the red clients had more money than the green ones. It was a column, abbreviated, that the staff had a nickname for. Not our demo. They called it. Sol heard Kessler say it twice. He's not our demo. Walk him out. A black surgeon from Southfield with a barn full of Corvettes red. A Latino developer who wanted his late father's lowrider restored. Cash in hand. Red. Walked out the door. Not our demo. An old money family from Grosse Pointe with a checkered past and a slow-paying habit green. Champagne. The master's bench. Sol photographed the list. He photographed the screen. He photographed Kessler's handwriting in the margin, where he'd written, next to a flagged client, a word Sol won't repeat here, and you don't need to read, because you already know exactly what kind of word it was. And Sol didn't just read about the list. He watched it work. On Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, a man came in the front door, black, maybe 60, in a windbreaker and a ball cap, with the careful, hopeful walk of a man who has saved a long time for something. He had a folder of photographs under his arm. Sol, pushing his cart along the far wall, drifted close enough to hear. Afternoon, the man said to the salesman at the desk. My name's Walter Henderson. No relation to anybody. I've got my father's 1962 Impala, a super sport. He bought it new, drove it 40 years, left it to me when he passed. It's been under a tarp in my garage 8 years now, and I finally saved up to do it right. Do it real right. And everybody says Bishop's the best in the country. So, he set the folder down, opened it, and his voice went soft and proud. Here she is. This is what she looked like the day my daddy drove her home. Sol saw the salesman's eyes flick down to the windbreaker, the ball cap, the man's worn hands, and then over to a tablet, where a thumb moved, and a thing was checked, and a decision that had nothing to do with the photographs or the Impala or the 40 years was made in less than 2 seconds. You know, the salesman said, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. I'd love to help you, but our restoration calendar is full for the next 2 years. And honestly, Sir, a full concours restoration on a car like that, you're looking at low 6 figures. It's really not. I'd hate for you to get in over your head. There's a good general shop over in Warren that might be more in your range. Let me write down the name. The man's face did something then that Sol felt in his own chest. The pride folded up. The hope went quiet and careful again. The way it does in a man who has had a lot of doors close, soft in his face. Soft, so they can pretend it isn't a door closing. 2 years. Walter Henderson said. Sure. Okay. I understand. He gathered up the photographs of his father's car. Slow. Careful. And put them back under his arm. Thank you for your time. And Sol watched a black man carry his father's legacy back out the front door of a company a black man built. Turned away. Not our demo. While across the showroom, a salesman was already pouring champagne for a Grosse Pointe family whose check, Sol happened to know, had bounced twice that quarter. Sol got the man's name off the folder. Walter Henderson. He wrote it down. He would remember it. That Impala would get restored. He promised himself right there by the wall, with a mop in his hand. And it would get restored by the finest hands in America. And it would not cost Walter Henderson 1 red cent. But not yet. Tomorrow first. Tomorrow. The reckoning. His father had built the company so that a man's worth was the work and the money and nothing else. And they had turned it into Beaumont. They had built 2 water fountains inside Bishop. But the thing that broke Sol's heart, the thing that turned the cold concrete in him into something with a fuse, was Camille. Camille Foster was 24 years old. And she had the best hands in that building. And Solomon Bishop in 23K. He'd seen a lot of mechanics in 50 years. He'd seen genius maybe 4 times. She was the 5th. He watched her. From across the shop. Diagnosed by ear. A fault. In a 1936 cord. That 2 senior restorers had been chasing for a week with a laptop. And a manual watched her tilt her head. Listen. Lay one hand flat on the cowl like she was taking a pulse. And then quietly go fix the exact thing. No laptop. No manual. Just the gift in the hands that God doesn't hand out twice. It was Cornelius. It was Sol himself at her age. It was the real thing. Sitting in the back of the shop in a borrowed coverall. Being treated like nothing. Because that was the second thing Sol learned. They were stealing her. There was a young man in that shop named Trip Calloway, country club name. Country club hands. A legacy hire whose father golfed with a board member. Trip could barely set a points gap without supervision. And Trip's name was on the work order for the cord. Trip's name was on the sign-off sheet for the centerpiece. Trip's name, Sol came to understand, was on every beautiful thing Camille's hands produced. Because the system was built that way, the apprentices did the work. A lead signed it. The lead got the credit. The bonus. The client praise. The master track promotion. And the apprentice got a paycheck 2/3 the size of the man taking her name off her work. Sol saw it happen in real time. Saw Camille spend 11 hours bringing a seized differential back to life on the centerpiece. Cadillac. The Pruitt Cadillac. His father's Cadillac, and saw Trip Calloway saunter over at the end of the day, run a cloth over it, and the next morning stand next to Preston Hawthorne telling a journalist, "Yeah, the diff was a real challenge. Took everything I had. But that's the Bishop standard." You know, while Camille stood 12 feet away in a corner, jaw tight, eyes down, and said nothing, because she had learned that saying something cost more than it bought, and Sol heard them talk about her when she wasn't there. He was emptying a trash can outside the break room when he heard Kessler and Calloway through the open door. "She's good. I'll give her that," Calloway said. "Like, annoyingly good. It's almost a problem." "It's not a problem," Kessler said. "She does the work. You sign it. Everybody's happy. You think Preston's going to put her in front of a client at the gala? Come on. She's not the image. She's a set of hands. Hands are cheap. A laugh. Honestly, after the gala, I don't think she's around much longer anyway. Preston wants to modernize the workshop, cut the bench staff, outsource the grunt stuff, to package up the in-house techniques into a method we can brand. The Hawthorne method. Another laugh. You and me are going to be the faces of it. She's going to be a line item we deleted. The Hawthorne method. They were going to fire the most gifted restorer in the building. A young black woman, doing the finest work in America. And steal not just her credit, but her techniques, her gift. Repackage it under a white man's name. And call it innovation. They were going to do to Camille Foster. In 2024, The precise thing Beaumont, Tennessee had tried to do to Cornelius Bishop in 1956. Take everything a black craftsman built, put a white name on it, and throw the craftsman in the dark behind the chemical drums. 2 stories, 68 years apart. The same theft, the same hands, the same lie. Saul stood there with the trash bag in his fist, and something in his chest went very still and very clear. He was not going to file a complaint. He was not going to call a lawyer Monday morning and let it grind through 3 years of motions while these men kept their bonuses. No, the gala was Saturday. The whole city was coming. The press, the board, the cameras. They wanted a stage. They wanted a sheet to pull off a sign in front of 1,000 people. He would give them a stage. That night, the last night before the gala, Saul stayed late. The cleanup crew always stays late, and he found Camille alone in the shop, fighting the centerpiece, Cadillac. She didn't hear him come in. She was bent under the dash of the 1957 Cadillac, the Pruitt car, with a work light and a furious kind of focus, chasing a fault in the wiring that kept killing the dome circuit. Tomorrow it would sit under a spotlight in front of 1,000 people. Tonight it wouldn't light its own interior, and she was the only one in the building who cared enough to stay and fix it, on her own time, for a credit that would go to Trip Calloway in the morning. Saul watched her for a minute. Then he set down his bucket. Ground strap, he said quietly. She jumped, banged her head on the dash, came up with a wrench, half raised, and her eyes hot. Jesus, you scared the who are you? Clean up, Saul said, and nodded at his bucket. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. He paused. It's the ground strap. On a 57 Brougham, body ground runs through a strap behind the kick panel. Passenger sill. 60 years of corrosion. It goes high resistance. Kills your low draw circuits first. Dome light. Then your clock. Engine runs fine, 'cause the heavy stuff finds its own path. You've been chasing it in the harness. It's not the harness. It's the strap. Camille Foster stared at him. She stared at him. The way you stare at a thing that doesn't fit an old black man in cleanup coveralls. A mop bucket at his feet, who had just diagnosed, in 8 seconds, by standing in the doorway, a fault. She'd been hunting for 2 hours. How do you? She stopped, looked at his hands, at the black fingernails, the comma-shaped scar, the way he held himself near a car, the unmistakable posture of a man who has spent 50 years inside engines. Something moved behind her eyes. Who are you? Just an old man knows a thing or two about old cars, Saul said. He came over, slow, and crouched by the passenger kick panel, and pulled it back. And there it was, the ground strap. Green and crusted. Exactly where he said. Pull this. Wire brush both ends down to bright copper. Add a jumper if she's pitted bad. She'll light up like Christmas. He looked up at her. You've got the gift. You know, the real one. I've been watching you 2 days. I've seen a lot of hands. Yours are special. You're the best one in this building. And it isn't close. And Saul watched something happen in that young woman's face that he would remember a long time, because nobody had said it to her. Not once. 2 years of her best work walking out the door under another man's name. And not one human being in that whole gold building had ever stood in front of Camille Foster and told her the truth. You are the best one here. Her jaw worked. Her eyes went bright and she looked away. Hard. At the wall. The way you do when you've trained yourself for years. Not to let anyone see it. Cost you anything. They don't. She started. And stopped. Tried again. It doesn't matter how good I am. You know how this works. I'm not the image. The word came out bitter. An echo of Preston, of Kistler, of every door. I do the work. Somebody else's name goes on it. That's the deal. My grandmother cleaned houses in this city for 40 years, and she used to say, Babi, to do the work so good they can't say nothing. And I did. I do it so good they can't say nothing, and they still take it. She stopped herself, shook her head. Why am I telling you this? You're the cleanup guy. No offense. None taken. Saul said gently. Cleanup guy hears everything. That's the secret of it. He stood, slow, knees cracking, and he looked at the Cadillac. The Pruitt Cadillac. His father's Cadillac, gleaming under the work light, and he made a decision about how much to say. Can I tell you a story? While you brush that strap old man story. Take 5 minutes. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and almost laughed. Sure. Why not? There was a man, Sol said, down in Tennessee. Long time ago, 1956. Black man. Best mechanic in 3 counties. Maybe the best you ever saw. And he built himself a garage in a town that didn't want him to have one. Hung his own name on it. And the rich men brought him their cars. Because he was the best, and money's money. Even the sheriff. Big, heavy sheriff who'd locked up this man's own cousin for nothing. Sheriff brought him a Cadillac. Sol ran one hand. Light. Along the fender of the car in front of them. A 57. Just like this one. And this man rebuilt it with his bare hands. Made it sing. And when the sheriff came to get it, this man handed him the keys, couldn't shake his hand. We couldn't sit at the same counter. I couldn't drink. From the same fountain handed him the keys. And the sheriff drove off and never said thank you. Drove straight across the street to a diner where this man, the man who built the car, wasn't allowed to buy a glass of cold water. On the hottest day of the year, Camille had stopped brushing. She was listening now, the strap forgotten in her hand, and that man told his son something. That man, Sol went on. He said, you build the world for a man, and that same man won't let you drink in it. He said, there's 2 kinds of people. The ones who ask what you're worth and the ones who already decided the answer's nothing before you opened your mouth. And he said, you will spend your whole life telling them apart. Saul looked at her. You know who that son grew up to be. That son built something. Something big. Something with his name on it. Took everything his daddy taught him and made it the best in the whole country. And then one day he turned around, and the people he'd handed the keys to had taken his daddy's picture off the wall and stuck it in a crate behind the paint cans, and were getting ready to take a young woman's gift, the best hands in the building, and put another man's name on it. Saul's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was worse. Same theft. Same hands, 68 years apart. Camille was very still. How do you know that story? She said slowly. How do you know about the picture in the crate? I saw them. How do you know that? Sol picked up his mop bucket. Finish that ground strap. He said, make her light up like Christmas. You did beautiful work on this car. Camille. Beautiful. And tomorrow? In front of everybody. I promise you your name's going on it. He walked toward the door and paused and looked back at her one time. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Bigger than they know. And he was gone. Out into the dark. An old man with a bucket. Leaving Camille Foster standing alone next to a 1957 Cadillac with her grandmother's voice in her head and a strap of bright copper in her hand and no idea, yet, that she had just met Solomon Bishop Saturday came in gold and white. They turned the showroom into something out of a dream. 1,000 chairs, a red carpet up the front steps, ice sculptures and a string quartet and waiters in white gloves carrying champagne through $20 million of polished steel. The press came 3 television cameras, a dozen photographers, the glossy magazines, the Auto World Press, the Detroit papers. The board came, a legion of them, seated up front. The mayor's office sent a deputy. The collectors came, the real ones, the people who own the buildings other people work in. And at the center of it all, on a rotating platform under a spotlight, draped in white silk, sat the centerpiece, the 1957 Cadillac. Sheriff Earl Pruitt's Cadillac, restored to a glory it had not known in 70 years, its dome light. Saul noted from the back of the room, glowing warm and perfect through the glass, like Christmas, and up above the grand staircase, on the wall where Cornelius Bishop had hung for 40 years. There was now a second sheet of white silk, hiding something large and rectangular, with a gold cord hanging beside it, waiting to be pulled. Solomon Bishop stood at the very back, by the service door, in his father's work clothes, with a trash bag in his hand. Invisible. Preston Hawthorne took the stage at 8 o'clock to thunderous applause. He was magnificent. You had to give him that. The suit, the smile, the easy command. He thanked the board. He thanked the city. He talked about excellence and legacy and the future. And then he got to the part he'd been waiting for. And his voice took on a richer, hungrier note. 70 years ago, Preston said, this company began in a very, very humble place. A little two-bay garage on the east side. Honest beginnings. And we honor those beginnings. A warm, condescending smile. But ladies and gentlemen, a brand cannot stay humble forever. Greatness demands evolution. And tonight, I am thrilled to unveil the next 70 years. A new identity, a new name, a name that says world class, a name that says the finest there is. He turned and lifted a hand toward the silk-draped wall above the staircase, toward the gold cord. Ladies and gentlemen, say goodbye to the past, and hello to the future of automotive restoration. Before you pull that cord, said a voice from the back of the room. I think these people ought to know whose face you're about to throw away. It was not a loud voice, but it carried, the way a calm voice carries into a held breath. And 1,000 heads turned. Solomon Bishop was walking up the center aisle. He set the trash bag down on an empty chair as he came wide. He had his father's leather tool roll under his arm. He walked slow and steady, and he did not hurry. An old black man in faded gray work clothes walking up the red carpet of his own gala. And the whole room was looking at him, and you could feel the confusion ripple out. Who is that? What is happening? Is that the cleanup man? Preston's smile flickered. Sir, this is a private event. Garrett, he snapped his fingers. Scanning for security. Get him somebody. Get him out. He's not. Garrett knows me, Saul said mildly. And still walking. Garrett hired me. Tuesday. Told me the help comes around back. He reached the front of the room and stopped. And turned, unhurried, to face the 1,000 people, with his back half to Preston. You all are having a real nice party. I've been cleaning your bathrooms for 2 days. So I figured I earned a word, a ripple of nervous, uncertain laughter. Most of you don't know me. That's all right. The man up there on the stage doesn't know me either. And he's the CEO. So let that sit. My name is Solomon Bishop. The room did not understand yet, but the front row did. Walter Greaves was on his feet by the door, openly weeping, one hand over his mouth. And in the second row of the board section, an elderly woman with white hair and sharp eyes, Eleanor Voss, who had been on the board for 26 years, who had shaken Cornelius Bishop's hand once as a young woman, and never forgotten. It stood up slowly, gripping the chair in front of her, and said into the silence, in a clear, ringing, disbelieving voice, "Bishop, that's my God. That's Solomon Bishop. That's the founder." And the silence broke into a roar of murmurs. "That's not possible," Preston said, but his voice had gone thin. "Sir, I don't whoever told you to come in here and pull this stunt. Pull stunt." Saul turned, finally, to look at him, and for the first time his voice had an edge, low and bright as a blade. "Son, my father started this company on a dirt floor in Tennessee in 1956. My father's name," he pointed up, past Preston, to the silk on the wall, "is on this building. My name is on the deed, in the safe behind you, and the controlling shares of Bishop Classic Motors, the founder's shares, written into the bones of this company, so that no man in a nice suit could ever sell its soul out from under it, have belonged to me. Solomon Bishop, every single day, you have sat in my son's chair playing CEO." The roar got louder. Cameras were up now, flashing, rolling. The board members were on their feet, turning to each other. Preston Hawthorne stood on the stage with the gold cord in his hand and the color draining out of his face. "You hired me Tuesday," Sol said, and now he turned back to the room, because it was the room he had come for. "Walked into my own company in my daddy's work clothes, and the floor manager told me my kind doesn't get to touch these cars. And the CEO offered me $20 to mop the bathrooms and stay out of sight. And told me, and I'm quoting the man, 'People like you didn't build a place like this.'" A sound went through the crowd. A low, ugly sound. "People like me," Sol said softly, "built every brick of it." He held up his hands, the black nails, the scar, and turned them in the light so the cameras could see. "These hands, and my father's hands," and he turned and found her, in the back, by the workshop door, frozen, eyes enormous, and her hands. "Come up here." Camille Foster did not move, could not move. "It's all right, baby," Sol said, gentle as anything. "Come on up here. You belong up here more than anybody in this room." She came, through 1,000 turning faces, in her shop coveralls. She walked up the red carpet to stand beside the old man she'd thought was the cleanup crew, and Sol put a hand on her shoulder. "Light, like a benediction, this young woman," he told the room. "What did the restoration on that Cadillac you're all about to applaud? That centerpiece, the crown of your gala." Her hands, 11 hours on a C's differential. Alone, after everybody else went home, found a ground fault tonight that 2 of your master restorers couldn't find in a week. She is the finest pair of hands in this building, and it is not close. And her name is nowhere on that car. You know whose name is on it." Sol's eyes found Trip Calloway, frozen against the far wall, and Garrett Kessler beside him. And Trip went the color of paper. His, a man who couldn't restore a wristwatch, because that's the system you all built in here while I was burying my family. Black hands do the work. White names take the credit, and anybody walks through that door the wrong color of money. Sol reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper goes on a list. He unfolded it. He read it. He read the column they called Not Our Demo. He named the surgeon from Southfield and the developer who wanted his father's lowrider, and the men walked out the door of a company a black family built. He held up his phone, and the recording played Kessler's voice. Tinny, but clear. Filling the silent room, she's not the image. She's a set of hands. Hands are cheap. He held up another photo for the cameras, a crate behind 2 drums of paint stripper, and an 8-foot photograph of a lean young black man in the Tennessee heat. Face turned to the wall in the dark, with a sticky note that read disposal. That's my father, Sol said, and for the first time his voice cracked. Just slightly. Just once. Cornelius Bishop. They took him down off that wall and put him in a crate behind the chemicals and wrote disposal on the glass. The man who started everything. While they got ready to pull a sheet off a new name and erase him in front of 1,000 people, he set the phone down. He took his father's leather tool roll from under his arm, soft, dark. His father's initials burned into the flap, and he laid it on the podium. Gently, like laying down something holy. You want to know the difference between the 2 kinds of people in this world, Solomon Bishop said. Quiet now. To a room so silent, you could hear the string quartet's instruments creak. It's not the suit. My father wore work clothes his whole life, and he was the finest man I ever knew. It's not the name on the building. It's this. He laid his old scarred hand flat on his father's tool roll. What you do with the people you've already decided can't help you. What you do when you think nobody who matters is watching. He looked up and found Preston Hawthorne's eyes across the stage, and held them. I was watching. Song. I've been watching for 2 days. I'm the man you thought was nobody. And I'm the man who owns the floor you're standing on. Eleanor Voss did not wait for emotion. She was the senior board member present. And she'd been a corporate lawyer before she'd been a collector. And she walked to the front of the room with her sharp eyes blazing and addressed the 11 directors in a voice that did not invite discussion. As of this moment, I am calling an emergency session of this board, and I am asking every director in this room to recognize the founder, Mr. Solomon Bishop, who holds controlling interest, which I can confirm and which our council can confirm in about 90 seconds. She turned and looked up at the stage, at Preston Hawthorne standing pale beside a draped sign he would never unveil. Mr. Hawthorne, step down from there. You're done. It happened fast. After that, the way these things do. Once the truth is in the open, and the cameras are rolling, and there is nowhere left to hide, Preston tried, for a moment, to fight it. He always would. Men like Preston cannot conceive of an ending they don't control. He came down off the stage talking fast. This is a misunderstanding. Sir, if you'll let me explain. The rebrand was for the legacy. The list is a standard sales tool. That recording is out of context until Solomon Bishop turned and looked at him. Full on. The look his father had aimed at a Tennessee sheriff in his heart 68 years ago. And Preston Hawthorne stopped talking. Out of context. Sol said. There's no context. Son. Where you call a young woman's gift cheap and throw my father in a crate. You don't get a context for that. He shook his head. Slow. You're terminated. Effective right now. For cause, and every protection in your contract, your severance, your golden parachute, your stock. Every bit of it is void. The second this company's counsel reviews what's on my phone. Discrimination, fraud, theft of an employee's work product. You built it into the walls. You signed your name to it. Sol almost smiled. And there was no warmth in it. You wanted your name on this company so bad. Now it's going to be on a federal civil rights complaint instead. Yours and Mr. Kessler's both. Garrett Kessler made it as far as the side door before two of the company's own security men who, it turned out, had no love left. For Kessler either stood quietly in front of it. Trip Calloway sat down in a folding chair and put his head in his hands. By Monday, it was all formal. Preston Hawthorne and Garrett Kessler terminated for cause. Parachutes voided. Named in a civil rights complaint. That federal investigators and the state attorney general both announced they would investigate. Trip Calloway fired. His name pulled off 2 years of work orders that were quietly, painstakingly, corrected to read the name Camille Foster. The client list, the not our demo list, was turned over in full, and 3 different law firms began calling the surgeon from Southfield and the developer and every name that had been walked out the door. Because a company that keeps a list like that has bought itself a decade of reckoning. And the reckoning had a paper trail now, photographed and recorded by the one man they'd been too arrogant to see. But here is the thing about Solomon Bishop, and here is where this story turns. From a story about punishment into a black story about something bigger. He did not stop at firing 2 men, because 2 men are not the disease. 2 men are the fever. Sol had spent his life in machines, and he knew the difference between a bad part and a bad design. You can pull a bad part all day long. If the system is built to break, it'll just break somewhere else. The list. The stolen credit. The 2 water fountains inside Bishop. Those weren't the work of 2 bad apples. They were the work of a machine that had been quietly rebuilt, while no one watched, to do exactly what Beaumont, Tennessee had done in 1956. Take everything a black craftsman built and hand it to someone whiter. You don't fix that by firing the fever. You fix it by rebuilding the machine. The Monday after the gala, Solomon Bishop walked into Bishop Classic Motors through the front door, in his father's work clothes, and went to work. The first thing he did, before the coffee was even made, was go out to the cold storage bay behind the chemical drums and back out the drywall screws himself. On a B1, and lift his father out of the crate. He carried the 8-foot photograph through the shop himself. Would not let anyone help him. And he and old Walter Greaves hung Cornelius Bishop back on the wall above the grand staircase. In the gold frame, in the light, where the first thing anyone walking through the door would have to do is look up and see the face of the man who built it. And then, beside it, he hung a second frame. Smella, a photograph he'd taken with his own phone the night before the gala. When she didn't know, he was watching Camille Foster, bent under the dash of a 1957 Cadillac, a work light in her teeth, doing the finest work in America for free, for a credit somebody else was going to steal. Sol had it printed and framed and hung next to his father, and under it a small brass plate that read, "The hands that build it." Yesterday and today, he made Camille Foster the lead restorer of Bishop Classic Motors before lunch. He did more than that. He tore the whole rotten apprentice system out by the roots and built a new one in front of the entire staff. And he made Camille the head of it. From that day, every single restoration that left the building would be signed by the hands that did it. Literally signed. A small engraved plate in the door jamb with the names of every man and woman who'd touched it. Apprentice and master both, so that no one's gift could ever again be stolen and handed to a country club name. He ordered a full pay equity audit, top to bottom, and when it came back, and it came back as ugly as everyone knew it would, he corrected every salary, with back pay, and he did it without a single press release. Because, he said, You don't get a parade for finally paying people what you stole. You just pay it. He shredded the list. Personally. Fed it into the machine and stood there until the last strip of it was gone. And he wrote a new policy in plain English and hung it by the door. It said, "A person's worth in this building is the work of their hands and the content of their character, and nothing else. Not their clothes, not their name, not their color, not the size of the check they walk in with. If you cannot live by that, the help's entrance is around back, and it goes one direction, out." But Solomon Bishop was a son before he was a CEO. And there was one more thing he had to do. And it was the thing his father would have cared about most. He started a scholarship, the Cornelius Bishop Trades Scholarship, named for his father. For black kids and poor kids, and any kid that a town like Beaumont would have told you'll never rise full freight. Tools included. For young people going into the trades and engineering, the diesel mechanics and the body workers and the kids who could hear an engine and tell you what was wrong. The ones nobody was looking at. The ones holding everything up. And he didn't stop there. He opened the workshop on Saturdays. Free. To kids from the East Side neighborhoods, the company had spent years walking out the door taught by Camille. And by Walter. And one Saturday a month. By an old man in work clothes who'd rebuilt 3,000 engines and could diagnose a ground fault from across the room. And the 1957 Cadillac Sheriff Earl Pruitt's Cadillac. The car his father had rebuilt with his bare hands in a town that wouldn't sell him water. The car Camille Foster had brought back to glory and finally gotten her name engraved into the door jamb of Soul Did Not Sell It. He had it moved to the front of the showroom. Under the grand staircase, directly beneath the two photographs, and he had a plaque made for it. And the plaque told the whole truth. The Tennessee truth. The 68-year truth. The names of both bishops, who had given that machine their hands, so that every billionaire who ever walked through those doors would have to stand in front of it and read exactly who built the world they were standing in. There was one more thing. And it was small, and Soul did it without telling anyone. He found the address of Walter Henderson, the man in the windbreaker, the man with his father's 1962 Impala under a tarp. The man walked out the door on Friday with the photographs under his arm, and Soul called him personally and told him to bring the car in. He found the black surgeon from Southfield, the one Kessler had walked out the door. Not our demo. And Soul drove out there himself. On a Saturday, in his own truck, and knocked on the man's door, and apologized. Founder to customer, man to man. And then he restored both of those cars himself, in his own hands, the Impala and the Corvette. No charge. The finest concours work in America, and he delivered them back gleaming. Walter Henderson stood in his driveway and looked at his father's car, the way it had looked the day his daddy drove it home. And he could not speak. And when both men tried to pay, Soul pressed a business card into each of their palms, instead the Bishop logo on one side, and on the other, in his own handwriting. 4 words, "You don't owe us. Pass it on." The story got out, the way these stories do now. A clip of Solomon Bishop walking up the aisle of his own gala. I think these people ought to know whose face you're about to throw away. Went up online by Saturday midnight. Posted by a journalist who'd been in the second row. By Monday, it had 4 million views. By the end of the week, it had 30. People left comments in every language on earth. A woman in Lagos wrote, "My grandfather built things they put other men's names on. I am crying at my desk." A man in Glasgow wrote, 6 decades, and the same theft. Thank God somebody was watching. The photograph that ran on the front page of the Detroit paper was not of Preston, or of the firing. or even of Sol. It was of an old black man in work clothes hanging his father's picture back on a wall, with a young black woman in coveralls standing beside him. Looking up, the headline was 3 words: "The hands that built it." 6 months on, Bishop Classic Motors had a 2-year waiting list, and a problem it had never had before. Too many of the best young restorers in America wanted to come work there, because word had gotten out that it was the one shop in the country where your gift would never be stolen, and your name would always be on your work. Camille Foster ran the bench now, and trained the first class of East Side Saturday kids. 12 of them, 11, who'd been told their whole lives they were a set of cheap hands. And Camille told every one of them, the first day, what an old man had told her under a work light: "You've got the gift, the real one, and your name is going on it." The first 2 Cornelius Bishop Trade Scholarships were awarded that spring, one to a 19-year-old single mother studying diesel mechanics, who cried when she got the letter. One to an 18-year-old who could hear an engine the way the Bishop men always could. Sol handed them the certificates himself, in the showroom, under his father's photograph and the Pruitt Cadillac, and he sent them out with the same line his father had sent him out with. The line that was really the whole story, the whole point, the whole inheritance. Go on. Now, build the world. And when you're up, reach back. Preston Hawthorne settled his civil rights case, eventually, for a sum that was never disclosed, but that cost him, by all accounts, nearly everything. And he did not work in the industry again. The last anyone heard, the man who told Solomon Bishop that people like you didn't build a place like this was selling extended warranties at a strip mall dealership 2 states over. There is a kind of justice in that, and there is a deeper justice in the fact that Sol never thought about him again. The fever broke, and Sol forgot it, and turned his attention to the machine, which is what the strong always do. A year after the gala, on a foggy Detroit morning, Solomon Bishop came in at dawn, the way he always had, the way his father always had. He was 69 now. The showroom was quiet and gold in the early light. He stopped, as he did every single morning, in front of the 2 photographs above the staircase. His father, lean and unsmiling in the Tennessee heat in 1956, and Camille, bent under a dash, the future. And he reached up and touched the corner of his father's gold frame, the way he touched a workbench photo every morning for 50 years. And he said it quiet, just for the 2 of them. "Morning, Daddy." And down on the showroom floor, a young man was knocking on the front glass. Not a customer, a kid. 18, 19, black, in clothes that had seen better years, holding a folded piece of paper, shaking a little, the way you shake when you've talked yourself into one last try. Sol could see, even through the fog in the glass, the cheap shoes, the second-hand coat, the particular fear of a young person who has been told no at a lot of doors. The old Solomon's company, the one Preston ran, had a name for a kid like that. Ona list, in a column, not our demo. Walk him out. Solomon Bishop walked across the marble floor of the company, his family built from a dirt floor, and he opened the front door wide. And he said the only thing a bishop has ever said at a door: "Come on in. Som, out of the cold. You eat yet this morning?" He held the door. And behind him, his father looked down from the wall, and the Cadillac gleamed under the stairs, and the engraved names ran down the door jambs of 100 cars, every hand that built them, in the light, where they belonged, Whatever brought you here, we'll figure it out. Come on in. This door says yes. The fog burned off by 9. Now let me ask you something. And I want the real answer. Not the one that sounds good. You just watched a man get treated like nothing inside the very thing he built. Watched a young woman do the finest work in the building and have her name peeled off it and handed to somebody who couldn't do 1/10 of it. Watched them take an old man's father off a wall and write disposal on his face. And the whole time, the only thing standing between those people and the truth was a pair of soft hands deciding, before anybody opened their mouth, that the answer was nothing. Here's what stays with me. They didn't do it because Solomon Bishop was poor. He wasn't. They did it because of what he looked like. Cheap clothes. Old. Black. A set of hands. And in the second, they decided he was nobody. They told on themselves. They told the whole world exactly who they were. Because that's the test. Isn't it not how you treat the man you think can help you, but how you treat the one you've already decided can't? And I have to be honest with you. I had to sit with this one, because it is easy to watch this and think, I would never. But every single one of us has stood in front of a person in cheap clothes. An old man. A young woman who didn't look like the image, and made a decision in half a second about what they were worth. We all keep a list. Most of us just never have to find out who was on it. So tell me the truth in the comments. Not the answer that makes you look good. The real one, the cleanup man who fixed the car in 8 seconds, the kid knocking on the glass in the fog, the person you wrote off this week before they said a word. Would you have seen them? Would you have opened the door? 68 years apart. In a Tennessee cotton town and a Detroit showroom. The same theft. A black man builds the world, and they won't let him drink in it. And it only ever changed because, every so often, somebody looked up at the man they'd been told was nobody and saw the hands that built everything. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments so the next one finds it. Subscribe, because there's another one of these coming. And somebody out there needs to hear it. And share this with one person, just one who's forgotten that the people they overlook might be the very ones holding the whole thing up somewhere tonight. Somebody's standing at a door in cheap clothes, waiting to find out which kind of person you are. Be the one who opens it.